Hi there, I'm Christina, and welcome to my podcast. Nuanced Beauty is intended to be a spot where I'll capture some varied thoughts and challenge us to hold to our opinions loosely so that we can see the beauty in others and in ourselves. I want us to dive deeper into those everyday topics or those sticky topics and thoughts that we might shy away from or bulldoze over others with our opinions. Because I think if we all thought exactly the same, there would be no need for anyone else. So let's get nuanced. This week, we are going to continue laying the groundwork for a nuanced approach to life by considering the question, what are some practical ways to get better at nuance? If you had met me 10 years ago, you may have not liked me, to be quite honest. I was a bit rigid, pretty matter of fact, and not emotionally in touch. I've always been pretty intelligent, but I'd say I wasn't great at hearing people in a conversation and being able to acknowledge their words or empathize with their feelings. Fast forward today, and I'd say I've put some intentional effort into changing that. Perhaps I've been weathered by the life of my 20s and early 30s, add in a marriage and kids, and top that off with really plugging into a community. The one thing that is for sure is I've wanted to grow and to know people. I recently hosted a ladies' wine tasting event at my house. I've been doing these for a while, but this was my first one since moving cross country. And with that, I've met all these new people. In a future episode, I'd like to share all the how to's of hosting these events, but I'll stick to my point for now. I like to pepper in questions as we try the wines together. They're typically impromptu questions that just come to my mind. It could be something like, do you like cats or dogs? Or what's your favorite clothing store? Or what time do you get up in the morning? So, for this event, we had 6 bottles of wine to go through, and I was drawn a blank as we were about to try one of the wines. So, I asked the gals in the room if someone could come up with a question. One of the ladies said, how about what do you like about Christina? And I quickly responded, that's a question I would never ask. So, sure, let's do it. The responses were very unexpected to me and very heartwarming. I'd say it was almost a tearjerker with me, if I'm honest. But to summarize, these gals described me as confident and they described me as laid back and welcoming, and that I was an easygoing host. Um, I share this not to sound super proud, but to share how flattered I was. Like, I was so grateful and flattered by these compliments because if you had met me 10 years ago, I'm telling you, you would not describe me this way. It's just not the personality that really came to the forefront. So let's get nuanced. There are times when we think, I'll never change. That's just who I am. Or we write something off as, yep, that's Joe over there. He's always been just like that. It's easy to get close minded or convinced that by our confirmation bias and perception of things, that things will just never change. But then there are other times when we want to change. So it's kind of that nuanced situation where sometimes we want to cling to routine and habits for comfort, and other times we accept that time does not stop. We really have changed, or we really want to intentionally progress and do better. Let me reel my thoughts back in here and return to our question. What are some practical ways to get better at nuance? For me, I found that books and podcasts and the people that I'm surrounded by have been the consistent influence in my life in the past decade. They've really shaped my thoughts and they've brought me to where I'm at today. And I'm sure that focusing in these areas will continue to help me grow. I give my time and attention to these mediums because they have stretched my curiosity and they've changed me mostly for the better. So let's take a look at books. Why read a book? Consider this a gentle nudge to get you to want to pick up a book if you haven't done so in a long time. For those that may prefer a good fiction read, I think that many authors do a phenomenal job at researching the culture of the time and place that their book is written in. And I think it's really easy for us to imagine ourselves in the shoes of one of the characters. I think these books can also take us on an emotional journey and spark our imagination to consider how this character resonates with us. There's also so much symbolism and creativity and the metaphors and the message behind what they're writing really shines through in this space. Now, personally, I'm not a fictional reader very often. I acknowledge that I could really benefit from these books, but man, I just don't think there's enough time in the world to get through all of the nonfiction books that I have in my queue. That said, I do fondly remember taking an American literature class back in 10th grade, and I remember reading several books that really kept my attention. We read Killer Angels, we read The Scarlet Letter, we read a play called A Raisin in the Sun, and of course, we read To Kill a Mockingbird, and we read The Salem Witch Trials. And I guess you could say that these books left an impression on me. There's a timestamp in my mind, and I can kind of remember where I was at that time. And I can almost remember sitting there in that classroom talking about these books together with my fellow classmates. Let's continue forward to the nonfiction reader. That's definitely me. Nonfiction books feel like pure gold. I love getting into the head of the author as they retell their experiences and the mistakes and finding practical ways that they've grown in this area or that area. Many of the books I read just feel like free counseling. And we all know we could benefit from some counseling and that it's very expensive. Now, I'd be remiss to not mention the depth and breadth and wisdom and complexity I've wrestled with in the books of the Bible. My favorite book would probably be James in the New Testament. And I think you could tell that that kind of resonates with nonfiction reads. And I'd say Ecclesiastes from the Old Testament is probably my favorite as well. I've really enjoyed listening chronologically to the Bible at bedtime. I don't do it every night, but when I do, I'll set a timer and close my eyes while I'm trying to tune my thoughts into the words being read. And this has really helped me fall asleep when I was in anxious days, right? Like you just had a really hard day and you're sitting there awake and wrestling through just thoughts of what happened or what's going to happen tomorrow. Um, this has been a great method that I've used to get a higher perspective by seeing what God has to say about a situation. There really isn't anything that could replace that for me. So, have I piqued your interest at all to go pick up a book? I hope so. Whatever the book may be, I hope that you dust off your bookshelf and you crack open the pages of that book you never got around to opening. Enjoy the fresh paper smell along with the warm cup of coffee or tea sitting in a quiet spot that's cozy and get to reading. But before you go and pick up that book, let's continue on to the love of podcasts. A few years ago, I had a career sailing on ships at sea before I had my first son. I was pretty passionate about this job, and I also pictured having children. I couldn't imagine what life would look like and how my time would play out opening this next chapter of parenthood and working. After my son was born, a lot of things felt new and up in the air, and I was likely experiencing some depression. It was in these early days at home with my newborn son that I stumbled onto podcasts. I'm not for sure if someone had recommended one to me or if a podcast was mentioned in a book I was reading, but I decided I'd check them out. The first podcast I tuned into was The Happy Hour with Jamie Ivy. Each episode was an hour-long conversation with a guest, and I really loved the mental engagement I found in this space. Her interviews led me to check out other podcasts and books, and the rest of this story is history. You can find all the topics, right? As time continued, I expanded my listening. And for a season, I was driving about 2.5 hours a day commuting to and from work. And this too was ideal time for listening to episodes for me. I will go in waves of listening in on a podcast or topic, and then I'll find myself caught up in a book or an audiobook, and then a couple weeks will pass, and I'll find myself back into another podcast. As I was preparing for this episode, I realized that it sounds like I'm suggesting you guys listen to a podcast on a podcast. That's not my main point here. What I want to capture is that we broaden our horizon, and I want to ask you guys to listen to a wider range of topics, hear other opinions, listen to how people agree or disagree with you, and maybe you'll gather the sense of nuance that we're trying to capture here. So let's start with the topic of self awareness or reflection. I'd suggest checking out The Next Right Thing, The Enneagram Journey, Real Talk with Rachel, or Rhythms for Life. If you're looking for fitness advice or workouts, I most enjoy Revelation Wellness, and I also enjoy Keeping It Real with Jillian Michaels. For health and nutrition, I enjoy The Doctor's Pharmacy with Mark Hyman, Designed to Heal, Weight Loss for Women, Real Foodology, The Dr. Axe Show, and Fundamental Health. Those are all good listens. And as you can tell, I have a lot of podcasts I enjoy in the health and nutrition world. Then, if you're interested in politics, I'd recommend checking out Honestly or The Realignment. Also, Pantsuit Politics is a good one. For theological topics, the Bible Project, Theology for the Rest of Us, Gospel and Life with Tim Keller, She Proves Faithful, and Focus on the Family. Those are all good listens in the realm of theology and Christianity. Now, for current events, I've really enjoyed Breaking Points, Morning Wire, and sometimes I tune into Ron Paul Liberty Report. For interviews, I'd suggest the Joe Rogan Experience, the Huberman Lab, or the Happy Hour. On the topic of sex, Java with Julie is my go to. And I've also tuned into The Naked Marriage and Sexy Marriage Radio and The Birds and the Bees. Uh, Moving on to parenting, Mama Bear Apologetics, Birth, Baby, and Life podcast, and Famous at Home. Then for the topic of money, I've enjoyed The Ramsey Show. If you're looking for something funny, The Babylon Bee, The Boys Cast, or Mom's Struggling Well are all good listens. And for our kids, if you have kids in the car and you're headed somewhere, I recently tuned into Curious Kids podcast, and my son's enjoying that one. Now, you might be thinking, whew, that was a long list. Or, how do you have time to listen to all those? The answer is I most definitely do not listen to all of them all of the time. The point is not to compare or measure up to some golden standard here. It's really about having interesting, nuanced conversations with beautiful people. And these tools can be helpful to expand your own thoughts. For me, I've nerded out over many of these books and podcasts because I want to learn more. And I really enjoy having nerdy conversations with people. All right, friends, does a book or a podcast sound good to you? I hope I ignited at least a flame of interest in you to dive deeper and give your attention to these awesome resources. And of course, there's plenty of ways for us to consume information outside of books and podcasts. I just felt like these two are the most nuanced, and that's my goal here. On to this week's book recommendation. I want to recommend Farsighted: How We Make the Decisions That Matter the Most by Stephen Johnson. To quote, he says, "The craft of making far-sighted choices, decisions that require long periods of deliberation, decisions whose consequences might last for years, if not centuries, is a strangely underappreciated skill." I then go on further down the page. He says, "Yet you will almost never see a course devoted to the art and science of decision making, despite the fact that the ability to make informed and creative decisions is a skill that applies to every aspect of our lives, our work environments, our domestic roles as parents or family members, our civic lives as voters, activists, or elected officials, and our economic existence, managing our monthly budget or planning for retirement." I really enjoyed this book. He was witty in his approach of talking about making decisions, and he gave a lot of interesting examples along the way. And I think that this is a good read that ties into getting nuanced. When we are deliberative and we consider as many aspects of an argument that we possibly can, I think we make a better decision. We have to weigh out the pros, we have to weigh out the cons, we have to hear arguments for and against, and deliberate and take time and make a choice, right? There's one other quote here that I enjoyed. He says, "Courage, charisma, intelligence, all the usual attributes we judge when we consider voting for someone pale in comparison to the one fundamental question: will he or she make good choices when confronted with a complex situation?" Midterm elections just wrapped up, and it can be an exciting time or it can be a disappointing time, depending on what candidate you were hoping to enter office and represent us in government. I think that we have the opportunity to see a candidate's charisma and intelligence as we prepare to vote, but we don't get to walk with them day in and day out to see how they go about making decisions, especially in complex situations, which I think most decisions made for uh, the government level are complex. They come at a cost, and there are pros and cons to every choice. So I guess I would conclude with I would love to know if my politician read Farsighted. It definitely has some meat that they could chew on and help them as they're taking office. Thanks for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you consider leaving me a review or possibly share it with a friend? And if you would like to get in touch, you can send me an email at nuancedbeauty@yahoo.com. Take care until next time.